workshop on the issue of citizens' energy. In my view, I've been working quite a while on this issue, and in my view, citizens' energy is a very important puzzle piece, so to speak, of the energy transition. I keep hearing from citizens that they want to become active on the climate crisis and the energy transition, and I think it is our duty as policymakers to actually enable them to be part of the energy transition, of having energy democracy in the European Union, as opposed to the old centralized system where we had this fundamental piece of our industry, of our economy, in the hands of very few energy companies. And I think it is a great opportunity to have climate action at the same time as actual citizen participation in this important issue. I would like to start with the housekeeping rules. As has been said, the meeting will be recorded during the first part, but only until the end of the presentations. Then I would like to ask all participants to mute their microphones as long as they are not speaking, of course, because that will, if not, that will create a lot of background noise or even echoes, and that would make it hard to follow the event. As to questions that are being asked or requests, please do use the chat function of the Zoom software, and we will collect the questions during the presentations. We will group them, and then we will start with these questions in the Q&A session. And I would like to ask you for your understanding that we would like to give priority to the questions and comments from policymakers, because that's what this event is actually for, finding out how policymakers should embrace the citizens' energy transition on the national level. So I would like to shortly present the agenda. We will start with Rolene from EREF telling us what national governments are now obliged to do. Then we will have Christian Petrick from the EQ Union, who will enlighten us how adequate transposition and targets and monitoring should be ensured. Then we have Ludwig Karg from the EC Bridge Task Force on categories of energy communities. And Jens Lovitz from the Viadrina University will show us which traps should be avoided when transposing. And then we have wonderful Molly Welch from Friend of Europe. FOEE has done great work already on this issue, and she will tell us how we can get the enabling framework right. Please do mute your microphones. And the experience from the grassroots, that will be summed up by Dirk van Sintje from Rescoop EU. Someone has not muted him or herself. Please do press the button on muting the mic. So I would like to get started because we have limited time, and I would like to invite Rolene for her presentation and her speech. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let me just share my screen with you all. Great. So as Jutta has just kindly set out, I'll be first providing you with an overview of the Clean Energy Package and the new rights for citizens. So here, as an introduction, the Clean Energy Package has to be transposed to national legislation. However, with this, there is the risk that member states do not transpose it adequately, or they do it too late, or without the public consultation. Therefore, the next few slides will be looking at how should member states transpose these prosumer-related provisions, and how can citizens' input be ensured. So we'll be here looking at several pieces of legislation that are under the Clean Energy Package and lead to new rights for every citizen. So both the recast of the Renewable Energy Directive and the recast of the Internal Electricity Market Directive expressly see the consumer at the heart of the energy market, defining them as the renewable self-consumer under the recast of the Renewable Energy Directive, and as the active consumer under the recast of the Internal Electricity Market Directive. They both also defined these renewable energy communities, which we'll be coming to in more detail in the next slides, and the citizen energy communities, which we will also be approaching.
Mas eu vou lá para trabalhar, não vou estar a ver filme e ver PlayStation.
Sorry. I don't know if I can mute them.
Sorry, Rolene is both presenting and she's the host.
Great, sorry about that. We will also be looking, there's also the National Energy Action Plans. Sorry, if everyone could mute themselves. If not, I can leave the...
It's Molly, it's Miguel, it's Inez, it's Goran. A lot of people have their microphones open still. Please do mute yourselves.
The organizers can mute everyone.
Great, thank you everyone. So just mentioning the National Energy and Climate Plans, which are the 10-year National Energy and Climate Plans for the period of 2021 to 2030. And this was introduced under the governance regulation. So this is also another area where the citizens can develop new rights. Some of these rights which we'll be referring to is the right to generate, self-consume, store, and sell renewable energy and participate in energy communities. So here we'll be looking at the relationship between the Renewable Energy Directive and the Internal Electricity Market Directive. In particular, focusing on these new concepts of the renewable and citizen energy communities. So these concepts for the lawful control over and administration of local energy generation, supply, and management. So if we first look at the Renewable Energy Directive, this promotes renewable energies, not only in electricity. It fosters acceptance, entices local initiatives, and ensures equal footing, and has introduced this renewable energy community concept. Under the Internal Electricity Market Directive, we see that it regulates internal electricity market, addressing persistent obstacles to completion, aims at efficiency gains, competitive prices, and there's also elements of renewable energy support with horizontal level between market participants. And this is with the introduction of the citizen energy community. So only the renewable energy communities benefit from the support of equal footing. However, both benefit from an enabling framework that are authorized in the energy electricity sharing. So this next slide, this table sets out the distinction between renewable energy communities and citizen energy communities. It is very important not to get these two concepts confused. Therefore, I will briefly go over the two concepts just as an outline to go over them. So if we start with the renewable energy communities, here the energy is clearly renewable energy. The membership would be natural persons, small and medium enterprises, local authorities, including municipalities. When it comes to the primary purpose, as you can see, both the citizen energy communities and the renewable energy communities share the same primary purpose, which is for environmental, economic, or social community benefits rather than financial profits. Under the renewable energy communities, for ownership and control, it is effectively controlled by shareholders or members that are located nearby to the renewable energy project. And it's also autonomous, so no individual shareholder can own more than 33% of the stock. The advantages to qualify as a renewable energy community is the enabling framework to promote and facilitate the development of renewable energy communities and the energy sharing within these communities. Now, if we look briefly at the citizen energy communities, this focuses primarily on electricity. For membership, it can be any entity. As I said before, the the primary purpose is the same as the renewable energy community. And effectively, the control is by the shareholders or members. There's a limitation for firms, including shareholders, controlling entity to those of small or micro size. And shareholders engaged in large-scale commercial activities for which energy constitutes primary area of activity are excluded from control. The advantages of the citizen energy communities is that there's a level playing field and electricity sharing within these communities. There has been a joint transposition guidance prepared for which looks at citizen energy policies. This was published in June 2020 and is sort of a 7-page guide which looks into this in a lot more detail. We have the link at the bottom of this slide, and I think we'll be able to share this with you at the end of the presentation, as it really covers some of these topics in a lot more detail. Finally, just briefly looking at the suggested timelines for the transposition of these two directives. As you can see, for the Internal Electricity Market Directive, the finalization of the transposition is by the end of this year. However, it is clear at this point that several member states are likely to miss this transposition deadline. However, we think it's vitally important to encourage the quality transposition of this directive. And so really ensuring that the concepts are well transposed into national legislation. Regarding the Renewable Energy Directive, there's a little bit more time. And as you can see, the finalization isn't until June 2021. Thank you everyone for listening. I'd now like to pass on to the next presenter.
Thank you very much. That was very concise, and I hope that you will be ready to actually share your slides for anyone who would like to use them afterwards, because it is a lot of information in a very limited time. So now I would like to pass on to Christian Pietrek, who wants to tell us more on how adequate transposition can be ensured. Christian, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Jutta. And yeah, I can confirm that we will share the slides afterwards. I will also pass on the link that was just presented for the guidance document in the chat in a moment. So yeah, my presentation is on targets and monitoring. Please, next slide, Rolene. And in order to make sure that these new rights of the citizens are really getting into the new legislation of every member state, we think it is important to also set ambitious targets to really ensure that it's clear what do we want to get, or where do the member states want to get with all that. And we think or propose 2 targets, or at least 2 targets, one for rooftop PV and one for energy communities. And I will explain that in a second. So the rooftop PV target means that it would allow, if you set a target for rooftop PV, it will allow to show all the projects where citizens have to be or are being involved. Because usually when you have a roof, the person that lives underneath, or who's the owner of the building, has to get involved somehow also in renewable energy generation. So these are projects that are very close to the citizens. And by setting targets for rooftop PV and by ensuring that these targets are being monitored, you can be quite sure that these are projects where local citizens are involved. Not in all cases, but in many cases. And then we think there should be a target for energy communities, which means that there will be an overlap for rooftop PV targets, because some energy communities may use jointly a roof or a roof from a public municipality, but there will also be included projects that are in the vicinity of municipalities or where energy communities are working together to promote renewables. So these 2 targets, and ideally these 2 ambitious targets, should be the minimum what we would like to see in the member states' plans for the future. In the NECPs, we have seen very little on that. Unfortunately, there were statements given that energy communities should be, or prosumers in general, should be promoted, but there are very few targets, although this is something that the governance regulation is actually suggested to be given. And the next slide, please. So on the first target, the rooftop PV target, we think these targets should be linked to the overall technical and economical potential of the rooftop PV of rooftop PV projects. And there has been a study by JRC in 2019, which calculates the total rooftop PV potential to be 680,000 gigawatt hours for the European member states, which translates to more or less a rooftop potential of around 680 gigawatts. And if we say we should achieve around 50 or 30 to 50% of that potential by 2030, that means 340 gigawatts of rooftop PV should be installed by 2030. This is an ambitious target, but it should be feasible, and given the urgency that we are living in, and making sure that we use the built environment to the utmost extent possible, and by including thus the citizens that are living in these buildings, we think this is a target that should be kind of the leading goal for all the member states. Next slide, please. And for the energy communities, so renewable energy communities and citizens energy communities, we also think there should be targets. They should be ideally around 30 to 50% of all the new builds in the renewable energy targets. So every addition that is being made now on renewables, ideally renewable energy communities or citizen energy communities should be part of that. By that, it's being ensured that social acceptance is also considered. But yeah, the enabling framework that we will talk about later on that will be important, because otherwise certain projects may be slowed down, and that's not what we want. But we want to have this enabling framework in place so that energy communities are really getting involved there. It could also be set up a target on the share of households being members of energy communities, for example, 5% by 2030. And with regards to monitoring, it's important that the number of energy communities is being tracked. So the definitions that Rolene talked about are very important, so that each energy community can really be identified easily by statistically. Then the number of members on energy communities should be tracked as well, and the jointly acting renewable self-consumption activities, which should not be confused with the concept of energy communities in general. So we will also talk about that later. It may even be considered to set up certain obligations to involve renewable energy communities in renewable energy projects. Like in the Netherlands, there's it's a policy, it's not an obligation, but it's a general policy that 50% of the shares should come in new projects should come from energy communities. So this is something that the member states should discuss. And the annual monitoring is important to make sure that the prosumerism, meaning individual citizens as well as energy communities, are really being tracked, and corrective actions are taken if there's not enough uptake to be seen. And next slide, but I think that was it. Yeah, so with that, I hand over to Ludwig.
Thank you very much, Christian. Again, a lot of information in very few minutes. Thanks for being so concise, and I will immediately turn over to Ludwig. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I'm Ludwig Karg from Baum. If you show me the next slide, I can explain what I'm doing. Yeah, Actually, I'm heading 2 task forces, one in the framework of the bridge Horizon 2020. You may know or not that this is a platform where the Horizon 2020 funded EU projects cooperate. And there they created a task force to better understand the research needs and the outcomes of such projects that deal with energy communities and all topics around them. In that task force, which I lead together with Liam Peters from ThinkE, we look for good examples. We analyze the existing and the upcoming frameworks, and we talk a lot about, and we try to better understand replicability and upscaling needs for existing and to come energy communities. If you click, you get the other logo. There's a parallel working group that I also happen to lead. This is in the framework of the joint programming platform Aranet Smart Energy Systems, where we have a working group on regional matters, and obviously energy communities are something that matter regionally. So we joined the two, and we jointly operate a knowledge platform, and I will put a link to the chat, and then you can join us, and you will have the slides anyway. So when we started working, and you can switch to the next slide, we said, okay, do we have to concentrate on exactly the implementation of the KECs and the RECs? And we said, no, we have a broader view. And we came up with recommendations at the end of last year, and there will be another set of recommendations coming soon. And we more or less said, build on what you have. It's not a really new concept. There have been many approaches, and we know energy communities that have been successful for 100 years in a cooperative way. So look at what you have, avoid elite capture, make it a broad concept. Value also the contribution, and this was set out in the directives, of course, value the contribution of the KECs and the RECs to the community, to the environment, etc., etc. And finally, and it is put as the recommendation number 11, we said don't reduce upfront the concept of the KECs and RECs to mere collective self-consumption and vice versa. There's a broad way, there are many leeways for implementing energy communities in the directives. So if you switch to the next slide, please. We created an overview of classes that we believe are energy communities, maybe not all of them, and maybe not in any case qualify as a KEC or REC in the sense of the directive or the national transposition. But the first class and the second and the third is more or less collective generation, trading, self-consumption, linking residential and industrial self-consumption somehow. Then comes class 4, which is energy positive districts. This is a long discussion, and we feel like the energy communities could be the organizational instrument to implement energy positive districts. The same is obviously true for energy islands. If you click to the next one, then we had a big discussion going on with municipal utilities. You can hear I'm from Germany. In Germany, we happen to have roughly 1,000 Stadtwerke, small utilities, municipal ones. Some are also organized since dozens and hundreds of years as a cooperative. They should also be, in some case, considered to be energy communities because they more or less belong to the citizens. Then we said there may be institutions to just collect money or to cooperatively finance energy efficiency, not only energy generation, but also provide services. This is class 9 to the existing system. A good example there that we found and that we discuss is where the energy community consists of owners of electric vehicles and the operators of private electric vehicle charging stations, and they jointly provide a service to the local energy community or the grid operator, namely managing the flexibility of charging. So these are the classes that we identified, and if you switch to the last slide, I have only 20 seconds to go. It was very important for us to understand what is the relation of the municipal, of the local, of the small utilities and the very small utilities, whether they be municipal or not. How can they deal with the emerging energy communities in their area? I must stop. one sentence. We found in projects that are ongoing, the GoFlex project, the Fever project, the EdgeFlex project, and also in the Decide project that deals with the energy communities, we found more or less the small utilities have two ways to behave. Either they provide services to multiple energy communities in their area, or if they are small enough and qualify as a participant, they could even become a super peer in the energy community. And these discussions are going on in some European projects and also in the Aranet Smart Energy Systems world. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Ludwig. This is very exciting. I immediately thought of the Bürgerwerke in Germany, which are sort of a super peer for because they bundle energy cooperatives. I think they have nearly 100 now, and thus giving the opportunity to those cooperatives to selling their own electricity because they have someone who takes care of all the administrative stuff, which is, at least in Germany, it's really, really complicated. So we need peers like that to actually help the active consumers to play a role on the electricity market. But without further ado, I would like to turn over to Jens, who will enlighten us on the traps which we should avoid when transposing the European legislation. Go ahead, Jens.
Thank you, Jutta. I would like to discuss 4 issues. Of course, these are just examples for traps to avoid, but I think they're very important. The first slide, please. The first one is about capacity limits and commissioning. The second one will be about proximity and energy sharing. I will then say a few words about the question of inclusion, and I will wrap up with some thoughts about how to avoid conflicts when spelling out the enabling framework. But first, let's start with the question of capacity limits and commissioning. We believe that the qualification as and the eligibility for an REC should not depend on capacity or date of operation. And the example to illustrate the problem here is the transposition, the very early transposition of RED 2 by the Italian legislator. If you look at Article 42 bis of the new chapter on self-consumption on renewable energy sources from December 2019, there is a passage that requires that legal entities established as renewable energy communities are limited to total power not exceeding 200 kilowatt of renewable energy sources and which entered into operation after March 1st, 2020. So what's the problem here? It is that existing energy communities with our renewable energy plants already in operation before March 2020 do not qualify as renewable energy communities, but in this case, merely as a citizen energy community. And this puts them at a disadvantage vis-a-vis to RECs that are established after March. And disincentivizes, of course, to include existing renewable energy projects in these new renewable energy communities. The consequence in practice is that a new energy community that would include also older installations and therefore does not qualify as an REC would lose the incentives for its individual members, for example, PV net metering, while at the same time not having access to new collective incentives for RECs. The next slide, please. The second group of traps, as I call it here, is, sorry, the next slide, please. Rolene?
Hi, sorry, there seems to be some lag. 2 seconds. I think it will come back.
Yeah. All right. So the second group of traps relate to proximity and the question of energy sharing. And again, our recommendation here would be that energy sharing, that proximity and the term of the local area, which is related to it, should be contextualized, adapting to the national and the regional situation. And in a moment when the slides are back, you will see what the problem is. Okay, well, I'll continue with giving the example in order not to lose too much time. So again, I'm referring to the example of the Italian legislator. And at this point, I would like to stress that, of course, you know, I don't want to criticize the Italian legislator because they were very early in transposing. I'm sure there will be corrections or there will be waves of transposition. So this is just to exemplify. I could, you know, refer to many other examples. So what is the problem with defining proximity in local area? If proximity and the local area, which is only a criterion for renewable energy communities, are defined too narrowly, they exclude members that are not in the immediate proximity from the controlling shareholders of such renewable energy communities. And the Italian legislator actually, when transposing the RED II, put forward a requirement that while energy sharing in renewable energy communities via the public grid is permitted, the net metering, the metering points that the community possesses must be located on the low voltage power grids underlying the same, the medium voltage or low voltage transformer station. And that, of course, means if you think of municipal settings, that it is quite arbitrary which buildings are located on the same voltage net. So the decision or the criterion of which of these buildings can be included in the same renewable energy community would simply depend on the net infrastructure of on the architecture of the low electricity net. And thank you. Yes, that's the slide. So you see there's a graph, and the example that I have above is the one in urban settings. If you click once more, please, Rolene, then you see that in the city network, right, that's where the problem is. So the two houses that you see in the circle now cannot join the same renewable energy community simply because they are on the wrong ends of a low voltage network. But this problem is not only a problem, of course, in urban settings, but also in rural settings. Next click, please. As you see below, in rural settings, this might even be a bigger problem because the net architecture is thinner. It's not as dense as it is, and it might arbitrarily exclude partners from joining the same energy community. What is the solution here, or what's the compromise? And I'm referring here to the example of the Austrian pending transposition of RED II. The Austrian legislator plans to give the medium voltage grid as an upper limit. So the legislator opens this the scope of the renewable energy communities to the medium voltage grid, but at the same time introduces a stepwise reduction of per unit grid charges. So when a renewable energy community is using exclusively the low voltage grid, there will be a more generous reduction of per unit grid charges, whereas if it uses the medium voltage grid, this reduction would be less generous. So next slide, please. And I forgot to mention that if you think of wind projects or projects that involve heating systems, of course, this problem becomes even more prominent because as they are typically not located in the very close proximity of the buildings. The third area that I want to highlight is inclusion. The legislator, the European legislator, expressly postulates inclusion, especially of low-income households and energy poor, in various places of both the Renewable Energy Directive and the Internal Electricity Market Directive. However, he does not say how to facilitate this inclusion, and this is a big problem for various reasons, which I will not go into now. I would just like to stress that there are examples of innovative approaches. And one is the transposition of the French law on energy and climate of November 2019, which defines the legal entity implementing a social housing project by law as a potential renewable energy community. Once, of course, it implements a renewable energy project, and, which is even more important, defines the residents of these buildings as REC members by default. In consequence, this means that the French legislator introduces an opt-out model for social housing renewable energy communities, and in this way accelerates the adherence of the residents. Next slide, please. I would like to conclude with a few thoughts on best practice for the enabling framework. And again, the point that I want to make here, or the trap that I want to highlight, is that it is really important to avoid conflicts with state aid rules. There is, however, a solution here. We can refer to the Commission notice on the notion of state aid, and also a decision of the European Court of Justice with regard to cooperatives, which goes back to 2011. And following these principles that were spelled out by the European Court of Justice and then taken over into these Commission notice on the notion of state aid, the preferential tax treatment for renewable energy communities will fall outside the scope of state aid rules, conditional that regarding their local controlling shareholders or members fulfill the 4 next criteria. That is, that the renewable energy community acts in their economic interest, firstly. Secondly, that their relations are not purely commercial, but linked to the local individual renewable energy supply. Thirdly, that they are actively involved as prosumers in the local renewable energy project. And last but not least, fourthly, that they are entitled to equitable distribution of the results of economic performance. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Jens. And just as a point of information, the state aid rules on energy and environment are to be revised. The better regulation process is already ongoing, so every single person can make contributions to this Have Your Say initiative of the European Union, or rather of the European Commission, because state aid rules are within Commission. So we will not have a parliamentary decision on those, but those will be agreed upon within the Commission. All the more it is very important that citizens can make their voices heard, and as has been highlighted by Dörte Fouquet in another workshop, it would be great to exempt citizens' energy from state aid rules, saying this is a public service, so DG Competition does not have a say there. But that's another topic which we will have to tackle later on. But now I would really like to turn over to Molly Walsh, Friends of the Earth Europe. You have already done a lot on enabling framework and helping member states to do the transposition properly. Please, Molly, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Jutta. Yeah. And thanks everyone for being here. My name is Molly Walsh and I work for Friends of the Earth Europe. And we in Friends of the Earth Europe, we coordinate the Community Power Coalition, where many of these organizations speaking work together for a good legislative environment for energy communities across Europe. We've been working on this for some time, and we were quite involved in the negotiation process and the trialogue around this RED 2. Sorry, there was a bit of feedback there. If you go on to the next slide. So the first thing I want to do is kind of go back a step and have a look at what is in this Renewable Energy Directive. And in particular, we're talking about Article 22. This gives quite strong rights for renewable energy communities. So these 2 lines in the middle of the slide are the text that is actually taken from the directive. So member states shall ensure the renewable energy communities are entitled to, etc., etc. So in terms of EU law and in terms of what you can have in a directive, these are very strong rights. These are very strong duties on member states. Member states shall ensure that renewable energy communities are entitled to access all suitable energy markets. So when these are implemented at the national level, we think they will have a huge impact on the energy transition, getting citizens and communities involved, and therefore allowing it to be popular and swift. If you can go on to the next slide, please. So what is an enabling framework? We hear quite a lot about this directive requires member states to put in place an enabling framework. So what exactly does that mean? Now there is text in the directive. Again, all my black text here is taken directly. So unjustified barriers must be removed. The procedures must be fair, proportionate, and transparent. Member states must provide tools to facilitate access to finance. So that's quite a big one, and information. And capacity building support must be provided to public authorities. So by June 2021, all these things must be in place. But again, like Rolene said, we as a coalition, as stakeholders, will be focusing on quality. So if member states are a couple of months late, we rather that they get the enabling framework right. Could people mute, please? You could mute people. So the enabling framework will differ actually in every country. So that's why there isn't there are guidelines for what an enabling framework is. But each country will have a slightly different enabling framework based on what the barriers are in your national context. Next slide, please. So how to know what kind of enabling framework is appropriate for your national context? Well, the directive helps out in this case. This first line here, member states shall carry out an assessment of the existing barriers and potential of renewable energy communities in their territories. So this is a requirement by the directive under EU law that every member state needs to carry out this assessment, both of barriers and potentials. And now our recommendation is to start with this assessment of the barriers as soon as possible. Now, legally, it only needs to be done by the time the directive is transposed, but it makes so much sense to start it now and make sure that you assess, in particular, the barriers before you put in place the enabling framework. So for those of you who are involved in civil society or renewable associations, we recommend asking your ministry for this right away. Write to them, put pressure on them. This is something that we shouldn't be waiting around for. An accurate assessment of the barriers will lead us to an accurate enabling framework. Next slide, please. Some member states have already started transposing, and Jens already talked about some traps to watch out for. There's been some early not so good practice, but there's been some early good practice as well that I'd like to speak about. So Jon, there's noise coming from your microphone. Perhaps you could mute Jon Askar. I hear a lot of feedback.
Dirk, you're the host. You can mute everyone and then unmute Molly again.
The problem is that's also the slides. I'm worried that if I undo the slides, it might. I'll try now.
Yes, there's always Zoom issues. I'll continue speaking, and then whenever Rolene gets the chance, she can put me on to the next slide. Great. we want to highlight Greece as someone who's started early and done things well. And Greece has transposed some of this law under their cooperatives legislation, which is a perfectly acceptable and sensible way to do it. We heard quite a bit about the definitions earlier in this presentation, the need to get it right, the need to not make the mistake of thinking that renewable energy communities are only collective self-consumption. And one thing that's always been key for us in the definition is this aspect of social and solidarity-based mission. So is your energy cooperative there for the good of the people, for the good of the community? Then it's a renewable energy community. And that's what they put into Greek law. So energy community is all these things listed here. And importantly, it includes addressing energy poverty, which is a really key aspect of a lot of what renewable energy communities do. Next slide. I will also point out Ireland for a gold star on this case. Whilst they haven't transposed the enabling framework into their national law yet, they've started creating some of the structure of that enabling framework, particularly around finance. So they created a special pot of money, a ring-fenced pot of money within their auction system. So there's a lot of debate around auctions, but this is one that has allowed 7 new projects to establish themselves and start producing community energy. And this is the kind of support that's part of creating that enabling framework. I'm happy to take questions at the end. Maybe, I think that's my last slide. Perhaps you can just go on. Yeah, and then I'll hand over to Dirk van Sintjan to continue.
Yes, thank you very much, Molly. And thanks again for doing all this tremendous work on collecting which member states have already done transposition, which have not, and where the loopholes are. So now we can hand over to our last speaker. Dirk, go ahead with your grassroots experience.
Good morning. Can I have the first slide, please? So my name is Dirk van Sintjan. I'm the president of RESCOP EU, which is the European Federation of Citizen Energy Cooperatives. We only exist since 2013. And since then, we've been doing advocacy, or if you call lobbying at the Brussels level to represent the energy cooperatives that are around, as I was already said, for more than 100 years in some regions. So what was important for us is that we saw that the Commission was quite willing to do something about the role of citizens and energy cooperatives in. Now we lost the slides. So I'll put with the role of citizens and citizens energy cooperatives in the new directives, and we saw when they published the winter package, as it was called, so the Clean Energy for All Europeans package, there were sentences which we liked very much, and that sounded very familiar in our ears. So they said, well, it should be with citizens at its core, where citizens take ownership of the energy transition and where vulnerable consumers are protected. So we also liked their slides. It showed one of the offshore wind farms in Denmark, and one of them in Copenhagen, where half of the wind turbines are owned by one of our members, Middelgrunden. Do we see the slides? No? They're gone. If you want, I can share my screen.
No, I think just keep going, Dirk. Rolene is working on it. Sorry.
Okay. So if you look at the map of Europe and you put there all the citizen energy initiatives, there are more than 3,400 of them. Some of them, as mentioned, are a century old, from the very beginning of the electrification of Europe, but most of them are quite new. They have very diverse activities. A lot of them, most of them produce renewable energy, but there are also distribution cooperatives. Some of them supply renewable electricity or heat. Some of them are engaging in energy efficiency services, and quite new, there are quite some cooperatives already who engage into electrical car sharing. So what our aim was in our advocacy is that every EU citizen should have the same opportunities to become active individually at home or collectively in an energy community and take ownership of the future energy production. And if again, maybe I have my presentation up now. If you look at the map, you see that the existing initiatives are mainly in Northwestern Europe, and the more you go to the south, they are scarcer. And when you look at Eastern Europe, they are actually not present at all. To many of especially in Eastern Europe, this seems like the Commission and the Parliament and the Member States with these new directives, they introduced a new. You can go to the next slide. They introduced a new player, and but maybe it's not especially about a new player. It's more like it's a new game. And there's a new playing field where citizens are no longer spectators or supporters and look at the game between the public authorities and the market players, and it's about money. No, there's a new game, there's a new playing field where citizens organize themselves in energy communities, and and everyone's happy, and we succeed in the energy transition. Now the presentation is gone again. So to also from our part, we together with Client Earth, we produced also a guidance document. It's longer than 7 pages. So the project, it's 100 pages. Because we also provide a lot of examples of where some of the member states were at that moment in June with their transposition. I will post also the link on the chat box. So yeah, was it from my part. One of the examples that we very much like and we highlight quite a lot is the CARES scheme in Scotland, where this was introduced already maybe 10 years ago. They had a sub-target for renewable energy, and they also had a special pot of money where community initiatives could take advantage of, and this has worked. And the target, the community energy target, has been made bigger, and now all the developers, the private developers, they turn to the communities to co-develop, and that's also what in the Netherlands is now common sense, that all developers take the community along. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dirk. And oh yes, it would be great to leave this slide on screen for a while for those who want to just jot down the contact emails of our wonderful speakers. I have seen quite a few questions on the slides, and maybe we could just briefly turn to Christian, because there have been several questions on the targets which you have mentioned, and I'm not sure whether everyone is actually following the chat. You already did answer some of them in the chat, but you might as well repeat very briefly those answers you put there on solar thermal and other targets.
Yeah, thanks, Jutta. Well, indeed, you see my answers there. The main idea of putting up targets is really to say, without targets, it's probably not really likely that energies or citizen energy will be in the center of your strategy. Because then it will be just put on the side, and then maybe there will be an enabling framework. But if you don't really are behind it to reach a certain target, then a government may probably also not do too much. In addition, a target will also help with the monitoring. So you have to set up clear definitions so that you are able to have the right statistics in place so that you can see what is happening in that field. You have to really understand what's happening in the field. And without all that, yeah, not too much may happen. There was the question, why solar PV and rooftop PV and not